I don't have to
Recording
email
in
it,
progress.
but I have a few people I'd like to.
Yeah, the
have them
recording
in
just
week.
started. All right, that's done, and I will send that to you afterwards. Anybody who wants it,
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
send it to them.
Cool.
I typically don't record unless people ask me because I don't want to interfere with their privacy. So if you don't want to be recorded, let me know, and I will not distribute that to any. I don't distribute it outside. Good morning or good afternoon, good evening, Famida. I'm glad you joined us. Thank you.
So one problem at the moment, Kieran, is just that 6 p.m. is commuting time for a lot of people. And that's why some people might get attend. You know, if they're at work and they come home, they might be still in their car.
Yeah.
So I can share this with anybody that might be interested that otherwise would have attended.
Yeah, and it's going to be 6 o'clock every day from now until Friday. So because that's the only time I have free here in between my teaching. So 6 to 7, and we'll do what we can. And if people need more, we can set up meetings afterwards over weekends or other times, as long as we all are free at that point. So let me begin by talking again about how all this happened, how this crazy Irishman from Cork ended up finding out the solutions to these situations in schools and in workplaces, because the work was done in adult learning in a company that builds large airplanes. And I'm not giving any names here because we're not supposed to, but we all know who that is. And the point is that when it comes down to it, brain is the same brain that children have and we'll say adults have, and so it transfers across very easily and readily, in fact. And what we learn in the adult world is easily transferred with application and modulated so that it applies to the age group and the developmental stage that the students are in. So and again, I will keep letting people in, so people will be joining us as they get off work and get into their homes and get the system set up. Meanwhile, I was very upset when I discovered that not only was I not able to find the answer readily, people didn't have the answer. They hadn't even asked the questions. They weren't even thinking that there was a solution. And the second thing was that by staying here to find out what the answer was, I immediately became illegal. And that was a big crisis. I didn't think it was a problem that I couldn't solve, and so I thought I would take it on and be done with it in 6 months. Well, it took me 8 years, and the 8 years was a time where I was exploring a lot of the American, what I would consider to be that whole nightmare of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because I certainly wasn't getting that when I was illegal. And being illegal and being outside the system causes us to see the system in a different way. And so that explains why I was looking at the system as an outsider as opposed to insider. And that's important because sometimes when we grow up in a system, we can't see it. There's too many weeds in there. And in order to get that perspective, one has to be either put yourself outside or be forced outside. And in this case, I was forced outside. Eventually, I did manage to get the paperwork all squared away, and it was done by not what I would consider to be normal channels, because there are no normal channels. Unless you're a nuclear physicist, they don't want you, basically. And unless you marry somebody, they don't want you. And even then, it's hard. And I was already married, so that wasn't going to happen. But the point is that there are loopholes, and I was able to figure out the loopholes. And because of that, I was able to get residency, and then eventually to get a dual citizenship. So I'm Irish citizen and American citizen. Hi, Usman, and welcome. And as people join in, we will just say hello to them and then move on to back into the discussion. And I'm talking right now about how an Irishman from Cork ended up with this amazing amount of knowledge about neuroscience and education that is causing a really nice movement across the world with people who are interested in making that shift, first of all, for their own children and also for society, because the social impact is massive. And so at this point then, I was lucky enough to get involved in a 10-year, $50 million project with the National Science Foundation to study the impact of learning on children. In other words, how to engage children in schools. And this was with Stanford University, another Stanford Research Institute out of the Valley, and then the University of Washington College of Education and the University of Washington School of Neuroscience, called the iLabs. And so I thought, okay, this is a 10 years, $50 million, and all these great brains. We're bound to get the solution that I was looking for. Why would 12 and 13-year-old kids commit suicide in school? Why would they not be so distraught? Why would they be so distraught about their lives and so much anxiety that they would cause them to think that this was the solution, the world? And so we got involved in that. There was $50 million. Everybody got a big chunk of money. I didn't, because I was a researcher, and the universities took, their share of it, and we did all these projects. And at the end of 10 years, it was very disappointing that there was absolutely no result. We didn't get any great finding. There was no big, suddenly we have the answer. And at that point, I was thinking to myself, well, maybe there is no answer. Maybe it was a stupid question. Maybe that education is doomed because it's structured in a way that causes so much stress and so much anxiety on children that they won't be able to survive it. Some of them won't be able to survive it. And I was about to leave education when what I consider to be the miracle happened. And this was on a particular day in 2010 or 2011, when two nurses came in from left field from the School of Nursing at the University of Washington campus, and they were looking for a learning scientist. Now, these nurses were in their 70s. It was their last project. They were about to retire, and they had a 5-year, $5 million project from the National Institutes of Health. Now, the National Institutes of Health sponsors a lot of research in the field of medicine and health and all of that. But it's not typically someplace that the education department would look for funding. We typically moved in circles like National Science Foundation and other science areas. And so for me, it was a shock to find that the National Institute of Health were looking for a learning scientist. And I asked them what the project was, and they said that they had this grant and they needed a co-PI to work with them from the learning sciences to study the impact of marijuana and alcohol and drugs on adolescent brain. And since I had adolescent children at home, I wanted to know the answer myself. And I thought, well, this is an interesting project, so I'll sign up for it. It was a 5-year project, and I had to move across campus to the School of Nursing and set up office there. And in so doing, I didn't realize at the time, but I would have access to any neuroscience experts that I wanted in the field of attention, in fields like nutrition, sleep, activity, cognition, comprehension, deficits like ADHD, ADD, vision, even things like physical activity and other issues that would come up in a classroom or in a home at any of our where we have children. And so this was a very interesting thing for me to be involved with these people. And what happened very quickly was we began to open these two-way discussions with these experts who knew everything about sleep or nutrition or exercise. And I suddenly realized that these people were doing research in areas that we needed to explore ourselves in terms of understanding the biological and the molecular level of what's happening at the synapse, what's happening in the different lobes of the brain when we'll say rats or cats or mice or monkeys or pigeons or any animals that they use in their labs. But most of their work wasn't focused on children. Whenever they worked with children, it was because somebody had a problem in their brain, like maybe a blastoma or some kind of a something that needed to be taken out, a tumor of some sort. And otherwise they weren't in schools looking at children to see what was going on in their brains. This was a very interesting space to find this discussion, because one of our neuroscientists, for instance, was recently married and had a brand new baby. This infant was pretty difficult to raise. The sleep was disappearing very rapidly in the house, and there was a lot of anxiety and stress happening because of this little infant. And as a result, we were able to talk to this neuroscientist about his specialty, which happened to be sleep. He was the expert on sleep across the I mean, this man is amazing. And yet he was suffering from the fact that he was getting no sleep and his wife was getting no sleep because of this brand new infant. And he needed to know from me what's going on with my baby. How come this child is so difficult to raise? And so we had this great discussion and this two-way conversation that began to look at not only sleep but also children and how to engage with children and how to raise them. And suddenly we were able to open this corridor of interesting research that neuroscientists were now going to investigate, because in the past they were looking at, you know, rats and cats and mice and chickens and you name it, but not children. And so the reason that I was brought into this field with them was because they didn't want to be in the school system. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share my screen with you guys, and we'll begin talking about some of the research that's out there and also what it means for us as parents and as teachers. So I'm going to start off by doing this, share sound as well, and I'm going to put this up here. Okay, so again, we're going to talk about education through a neural lens. And when I talk about education, I'm really talking about schools, but also home, because what happens in the home is similar to what happens in the school in terms of if the school says something, it spills out into the home. If something happens at home, it spills out into school. And so there has to be some kind of a connection between both of them so that they understand not only the vocabulary, but also the practices and processes that can help our children to navigate this very difficult space for them. And we often hear the phrase like, you know, this is school, this is your youth, and this should be your funnest, best time. This is the place where you should be able to explore everything and have a great time. And yet a lot of children are so stressed and so unhappy in this space that it's hard to understand what might be going wrong. And we'll investigate that. We're going to look for, today we're going to focus a little bit on disequilibrium and also on attention. And I'll explain what they are and why they're important at the beginning as we progress. So we're going to start off with well, I just gave you a bit of background about me. I'm from Ireland originally. I came here for one weekend in 1982. That's 40 years ago. It doesn't seem like 40 years. It seems like a very long weekend. And in that time, I did a lot of work in the area of learning sciences and then cognitive neuroscience. And because of that, we developed not only pedagogies but also methodologies that are very applicable in classrooms everywhere. And we have many schools set up all across the world today which are neural concept schools. In other words, the faculty only know about neural concept training, and they shift from a behaviorist into a cognitivist approach. Now, these are all very difficult constructs like behaviorism and cognitivism, and we'll make them clear during the week as well. But right now, just know that this all has happened and that we're well on our way, and we're beginning to see the results, and those results get published in journals, peer-reviewed journals, but also we take them to classrooms everywhere. So again, as people join, I'm going to say welcome and glad you're here. And this is a recording, so if you have problems with recording, just turn your camera off, or else if you are okay with being recorded, that's fine, and you'll be getting the recording afterwards. So now I'm going to start with the program itself, and we're going to start, and you're going to need to engage in this for a little bit. And I want you to use the chat box to tell me what happens. So basically what's going to happen here is an image will appear on the screen, and I'm going to give you 1 minute to collect your thoughts and impressions on what happens in that image. I want you to single task. That means don't get on your phone or don't go talking to anybody. Just look at what's on the screen, think about it, and maybe jot down something. Write down something or jot down a thought. And imagine you here, or do whatever you need to do. There is no right or wrong answer. I just want to get your engagement on this. And so as soon as I put this image up, I'm going to start a timer, and you'll have 1 minute to react to it. 10 seconds. Okay, so in the chat box, and I'm going to stop sharing for a second. So in the chat box, I want you to type in anything you want. What did you see? What do you think? What's going on? What would you like? Just based on that little image. Horse walking in a sandy beach. I love that. Temptation of being different. I like that. Thank you, Marco. They look like little toy horses on a piece of kitchen. I love that. I love that. Yeah. So we wait for just one or two more. Nine horses on a sandy desert. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. And I want you to look at that picture a second time. Did anybody see the zebras? And we were looking at shadows. We weren't looking at horses. We were looking at zebras, and we could see the shadows. And the reason I'm doing this is not to trick you or anything like that. The reason I'm doing this for you is that very often we need to have a paradigm shift before we can make a decision or be able to go someplace. And before we can see something, then we're blind to it. It doesn't happen. The brain just doesn't see it. And suddenly we see the zebras, and so now whenever we look at that picture, we can't unsee the zebras. So what's happened in the brain? What's happened in the brain is that we opened a circuit, and we caused a circuit of neurons to engage around this choice, this two-pronged way of looking at it. It's either horses or zebras and shadows. And we might be a little bit surprised that we didn't see it first, but the point is that very often in our worlds, we see things the way that we've always seen things, and we're not looking for something else. And as I was saying earlier on, why some people can see and other people can't is always a mystery. And at the same time, when we show people, then they have no choice. They have to see both, and they can choose one or the other. And so we can always say, yeah, I remember, and I used to know this as horses, but now I see they were shadows, and in fact they were the shadows of zebras. So it must be someplace in maybe Africa or someplace in Kenya or something like that. In fact, this was the winner of the 2021 National Geographic Prize for the best photograph of the year, and it's obviously taken from a hot air balloon floating over the Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania or someplace like that. And if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, well, then you probably have an imagination that can take you there. And for those of us who spend a lot of time working in Africa, we do know and we have seen situations like this. But this is just a very beautiful image of what I call a paradigm shift and an opportunity for paradigm shifts. So on this week with me, you're going to go on a paradigm shift every single day. We have to, if we're going to understand the shift that's needed in order for us to become capable and not only capable but also successful with our own children, but also in our classrooms, and as we deal with the first of all 21st century students, but also just genetic students, the students that have been born in our systems by people. And because of that, because they're born by people, they have certain genetic qualities that they didn't have a choice over, they were given. And so without us knowing what those choices are and without us knowing what that means, we are basically looking at shadows. this week we will see the zebras as well. And I wanted you to just get a feeling for what it means to be in a paradigm shift. Because when we talk about paradigms, we really want people to understand it. And for you to be successful in a paradigm shift, then you can see that there are two ways or more looking at things, and I'm choosing the one that I want to choose because I have no other choice. So I want you to now, again, look at this information that I just gave you, and I want you to write down what was surprising about what happened so far today in this class. In other words, since you sat down and you've been listening to this, is there something that surprised you? Is there something you knew already but now seen a new way, and then what you need help with? So take 2 minutes and write this down, and then when we come back, I'm going to ask people to share what they think or what they have said. So begin. Ten seconds. And time. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to call on people to volunteer, and if not, I'll begin with Marco. Marco, anything surprise you about this discussion so far?
Actually, the question itself surprises me. Since actually, the image itself doesn't really surprise me, just makes me think, makes me reflect, but didn't really surprise me. Whereas your question about what surprised me, that I was a bit surprised of.
Good. Marco, will you choose the next person to talk?
Yes, because it's the only one I know, and I would like to see him, but I can't see him. Like, where is Kevin?
Oh, he must have dropped off. So
okay.
Let's go to somebody else.
Usman, I hope I pronounced it well. Or is it Osman or Sharif?
Hello, yeah, it's okay. You can call Usman or Usman, it's okay.
Great.
So Usman, what surprised you?
It was surprising though, because I thought it's horses and then suddenly comes the shadows. So I'm thinking to maybe next lecture I'll focus more.
Okay, Usman, will you choose the next person?
Susan.
Susan.
Please.
Hello, Susan. Maybe she, can you unmute, or else let's go to Famida. We can come back.
Hi.
Hi, Famida.
Yeah, for me, if you ask the question, the answer is different. But once you ask the question again and again, answers are different. So once you put a force on your brain, just to think about once and then rethink, the answers are different.
Thank you. So let's go to Iman.
Sorry, Kieran, I just want to point out that every time that someone talks, we can hear it. We can hear the echo from your. So maybe if you can mute.
Okay.
Okay.
I think I just solved it. Sorry about that. I apologize to everybody. So let's go to Iman, if you're there, Iman, and tell us what surprised you.
I was surprised that they were zebras. I know sometimes you can't unsee things.
Good. And then is it Celine or Celia?
Celine. Sorry, I'm just eating my dinner.
No worries.
Was it about the exercise itself or in the whole content?
Anything.
Yeah, I suppose the exercise itself, I didn't even see sand, so I need to get my glasses checked. Yeah, I didn't. But I suppose the content in general, I'm looking forward to hearing more really, but like I'm a teacher and I would see massive anxiety and stuff. So like I'm always trying to, I also do a lot of yoga stuff with them and trying to help them relax and calm. But every year I was a nurse, so I'm only 4 years now teaching, and every year I've seen an increase in it. And like this is pre-pandemic stuff even, but it's quite terrifying. So it's nice to think that you have a solution, like are you feeling there is a solution to the neuro or to the suicide rates? Because I find it quite terrifying, the whole thing. So like that's what I would like help with, you know.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. And so it is terrifying. And believe me, last week when I got that email once again from the same school and another child in my son's class, and even though my son doesn't know him because they are in different whatever, it
has a massive effect anyway.
Massive effect. And it's also something that's very contagious around 17-year-olds. So let's move on. I'm going to share my screen. By the way, welcome to Jimmy. Jimmy O'Hay just showed up, and welcome, Jimmy. We're recording this, so you will get to see the whole lot later. We're going to move on to something just fresh right now because we're ready to do that. Here we go. So what I want to say right now is that in our methodologies, we have developed a pedagogy that helps us to connect with teenagers and connect to even younger children, and particularly with learning in any system. But the reason I asked you to, first of all, look at that piece of disequilibrium, which was a paradigm shift, causing you to say, whoa, I thought this, but now I see this. That was a deliberate thing on my part because I want you to be in the correct part of your brain. You can only do that in your prefrontal cortex. And I want you there because that's where learning happens. I don't want you to be in a place that says, oh, this class is too hard, I can't do it, I'm not smart enough. That doesn't compute in terms of being able to not only acquire information, but also to process information and to feel good about it. And so this model itself starts off with initial thoughts. So I wanted your initial thoughts about what was happening, what was surprising. Did you enjoy it? Was it funny? It doesn't matter. There is no wrong answer for this. I just want you to be in a place where you're able to connect your initial thoughts to what we are doing. And by doing that, I guarantee that we're in our prefrontal cortex, which is the higher order processing center for the brain. Then we have multiple perspectives, and that's what's coming up next. We already did the perspective on paradigm shifting with the zebras and the horses. And now we're going to, and we did a small bit of reflection. We revising our thinking will happen later, and then reporting out will happen over the week. In other words, in the past, as teachers and as parents, we knew about the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. Even though some of those don't start with R, we called it 3 R's. Reading was something that all children need to do. Writing, all children need to do, even though it starts with W, we call it an R. And then arithmetic, which is mathematical, computational, that's higher order thinking and processing. And again, that starts with A, but we call it R, the 3 R's of school that we all grew up with. Today, we add 3 more R's. They reflect, revise thinking, and report out. And so you'll be part of that. And that's one of the big pedagogic shifts that we do, is we cause our children to be in a metacognitive state so they can think about their thinking and plan and process based on having the right part of the brain. And we'll explain all that later on as well as we process information through the week. We started with disequilibrium. That was the zebras and the horses fun. It wasn't hard, and disequilibrium is really important, because when I cause disequilibrium in the brain, it forces you to want to solve the problem. Oh, I didn't even see those zebras. Oh, and I was looking at that, that funny thing in the middle of the picture. It looked like mud or maybe a broken photograph or something. And yet now I see that I didn't notice the zebras. Nobody in the class saw the zebras. And when I looked at it first, I didn't see zebras either. But now every time we look at it, we have no choice. We have to see zebras. And so I'm going to show it to you one more time so that Jimmy, who came in late, will be able to see it as well, because I want you to understand the shift. And it's a very simple shift, but there it is. When you look at it first, what we did was we took a single task, we thought about it, we wrote down, we just let our imagination run free, and there they are. These are the beautiful little horses galloping across or even walking across the sand. And then after we had a discussion about it, we realized these are not horses, these are shadows, and that there were shadows of zebras. And how could we have missed that? And the point, of course, is that we miss stuff all the time. In our brains and our thinking systems, we get stuck in models, we get stuck in routines, and they make no sense. And yet we're doing them for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. And by the way, some of the discoveries that we'll talk about this week in neuroscience that apply to teaching and raising children were discovered in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. And I found them in 2019. That's 3 years ago. And I've been doing this work since 2010, and I still didn't see them until about 2018, 2019, 2020. And every week, as I read more papers and I dig deeper, I find more and more information that's been out there for a long time. And we, as parents and as teachers, need this information. So I'm going to go back in here to this model and bring you back to where we are. Again, the model itself has initial thoughts, multiple perspectives, 3 R's, 3 cognitive R's, and then we always begin with disequilibrium. And the disequilibrium, I didn't invent that. That comes from Piaget. And all of you who are teachers and who have been in the education business know that Piaget did a lot of work back in the 1930s in Switzerland. And in that case, he was basically trying to figure out how to raise his own daughters. And he did. And in so doing, he also designed the developmental stages of education. Now, he wasn't a psychologist, he was a scientist, and he took his knowledge of science and he applied it to children. He came up with this amazing developmental stages, like that talks us about going from concrete to abstract, and that's part of how the brain focuses and pays attention and also grows. And so we take that much further today. He said, in order to get your children to engage, you have to introduce disequilibrium. Disequilibrium causes them to disrupt their status quo. And the status quo causes them to be in that routine of seeing but not seeing. In other words, we saw shadows and we thought they were horses. And then we find out, oh, these are zebras. So here's an example of disrupting the status quo. Every child will tell you that the moon comes out at night and the sun comes out by day. And you say, yes, that's fabulous. I'm glad you know that. And you read them the story, Good Night Moon at nighttime. And they love school and love life is good. And then one Tuesday at 3 o'clock, you're out in the garden and you look up and you say, oh my goodness, look at that. There's the moon over there and there's the sun over there. How could that be? That's disequilibrium. The child says, uh-oh, the moon shouldn't be out. It's not nighttime. And so there's a disequilibrium for the child. And then you say, well, let's figure out what's going on. And then the child and you do some research together, you co-create that space, and suddenly the child says, oh my goodness, there's a sun thing, and there's a moon thing, and there's planets, and there's all kinds of ellipses, and oh my goodness, there's an awful lot more. And suddenly the child now has a vision of what was, and they can see their thinking shift. And now there's a choice to new information, and they will be able to process that information and assimilate that new information with prior knowledge and have deep understanding, because they co-created that space with you. And so the disequilibrium of showing them something that was their belief but wasn't really true, the same way that we looked at shadows and we didn't see them as zebras, and now we can't unsee them. That's what the brain can do. But also, because the brain is so plastic, we, you, all of us, have grown white matter tracks in our brain today to understand that simple shift from shadows to zebras. And we can see them forever. We can't unsee them. I apologize for that, but if for the next 50 years, you'll be thinking about zebras as shadows and horses as zebras. And there's nothing I can do about that, because it's now encoded into your long-term memory, because we've had this connection together based on a piece of disequilibrium. So this is how a brain works, and this is how we like to teach. And so today we're going to think about that question that Celine just talked about. In other words, she's been in the classroom and she sees stress and anxiety increase dramatically, and it's very stressful for us. It's very difficult for us to see it, and we'd like to solve it. And of course we can, and that's the big question. So why, and this is the question we're really looking at, why are some children less resilient and more reactive than others? And again, we all have children, or we all have access to situations where children are involved. But remember that children are, they have a brain, and when they grow up, they become adults and they have the same brain. And if we don't solve it in the children's space, they'll go through life with the same problem. We call that dysregulation, dysfunction, dysregulation. And in fact, there's another neuroscience tech term we call on it, sometimes called EFI, which is executive function impairment. And believe it or not, I spend a lot of my time working with adults and companies like Nike, Microsoft, companies like CVS, Aetna, with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of employees across the world. And they have the same problems in the workplace that your children have in the classroom. They have the same suicide rates in the workplace as your children have in the classroom. In other words, if you don't solve it in the classroom, it'll stay with them throughout life. Now, we can solve it at age 25 or 35 or 45, but it's a lot harder because we've already myelinated structures in the brain that cause them to be in that negative space, in that spiraling space where anxiety and depression can manifest itself. And if we solve it at age 3, 4, 5, and 6, they have it solved for life. And that's the beauty of what we're doing here today. So I'm going to move on to this very important factor now. And I'm going to stop sharing for just a second, and then I'm going to come back again. I want you to take a deep breath and get ready for what's coming next, because what's coming next is a very serious solution to all of us, ourselves first, and then our children. And so I want you to be ready for this. I want you to just take a second, take a deep breath, and give yourself a hug. That means you're going to put your hands around yourself like that, because when you do that, you cross the midline and you engage your corpus callosum in your brain. So remember that when I move my right hand, it's my left brain hemisphere that's moving, that's warming up. When I move my left hand, my right hemisphere is moving up. But when I hug myself like that, I cross the midline, and that means I've got the corpus callosum engaged. And I want your corpus callosums involved in this. I already have your prefrontal cortex because of the disequilibrium, but now I want to get everything else engaged as well. And so thank you, Iman, for giving me the thumbs up. I know you like this. I know you're already doing it in your classroom if you have a classroom, and that it makes sense. So I'm going to share again, and this time we're going to go into a small bit of genetics, and don't get lost in that. Don't worry about how scientific it is. Don't worry about how sometimes the words are so weird, and it's mostly Latin and Greek anyway. So it doesn't, unless you have a degree in Latin and Greek, it's going to be translation time. But we make that simple, and we help you to understand the processes. So I'm going to share again, and we'll start off with the little infant. And the infant that we're going to talk about today is going to be called Charlie. And before we go further, I'm going to show you a short video. And when we do, I want you to think about serotonin. And serotonin is a neurotransmitter that is very important in every one of us. We all get serotonin, but it's very important for a number of reasons. It's important because it's the happy gene. It's the one that makes us feel good, that makes us feel part of and engaged and okay about ourselves in whatever we're doing. And so to get to that space, I'm going to first of all introduce you to little Charlie. And little Charlie is coming up here. 1 second. I'm going to bring up Charlie for you. And I need to share him. Desktop. All right, so I need somebody to tell me if you can see the little pink Charlie on the screen or not before I go ahead.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
can.
we can.
Also give me a thumbs up, Celine, if you can hear it when it's sound. Make sure that the sound is on. So it's going to start now. Yeah.
Pretty amazing. Charlie.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about Charlie for a second. I'm going to put him back here. And the reason for that is I want you to look at Charlie. And I chose him because, first of all, he has no hair. And even though he's wearing pink, we know he's Charlie, so we assume it's a boy. We don't know who else is in the room with him, but we can hear voices and we can feel the energy. The reason that we like the fact that he has no hair is because we can almost see his brain. I want to focus on brain. What's going on in his brain? You can tell that this is probably maybe 12 or 13 or 14 months. He's getting a little bit ambulatory. He still falls a lot. But when he does, he picks himself up without any problem and gets back into it. He can pick up blocks with one hand or with two hands, and he reacts immediately to the energy that he gets from, I'm assuming, his parents in the room. And so the point I'm making here is that if it was a different house with different parents, Charlie would have a very different outcome. In other words, if the parents were saying, oh, easy, Charlie, don't fall, be careful, I'll do that for you, then Charlie would have a very different outcome in terms of what's happening in his brain. And in other words, Charlie was born with certain factors, and then his environment gives him some other factors that causes him to be who he is. We can tell already by just intuition that this is a pretty happy child. And we also know that some children are not quite so happy. In fact, they can be very externalizing, they can be miserable, they can be sad, they can be, not as engaging. And we may think, oh, what's wrong with my child? Because when that little infant is born and we look at it, we say, oh, good, he's got 2 eyes, he's got 2 hands, got 10 fingers, got 10 toes, everything looks good. But we don't know what's going on inside between the 2 ears. We have no idea. And then later on, we see behaviors happening and we say, oh, good, these are great behaviors. I like the fact that he's smiling, he's engaging with his eyes. We can make contact, and he's beginning to vocalize, and he's beginning to point and reach up and grab and all that. And so all those things make sense. and then sometimes we have children who are not going to give us any visual connection. They may be delayed in their speech. They may not want to point and grab and all kinds of stuff that cause us to be worried. But we're like, oh, I wonder if there's something we don't know. And then we bring it to some expert and we don't trust the expert. We're afraid. And there's a lot of anxiety around what's going to happen with this little baby, because this is our beautiful baby and we all have them. So my question to you is, and it's a very important question, when this infant is born, it's like 1 second old and the baby is there and you think, wow, look at this beautiful baby. And they're cutting the umbilical cord and they're cleaning it up and all that. And you say to yourself, how many neurons does this child has? Does this child have as many as me or you, as many as mom or dad, as many as the nurse who's cleaning up the child, is just getting it ready to give to you? And so has this child got nothing going on in there? Is there something going on? What's happening? And many people don't ask those questions or even think about those questions. But in fact, this little infant that's 1 second old has the same amount of neurons as you. That's about 100 billion neurons, billion with a B, billion neurons. And so the difference between Charlie and we'll say you is that he has had no experience yet in the world in order to grow those white matter structures. So now we're ambiguating between neurons that are gray matter and then the connections between the neurons, which would be white matter. And so Charlie's life, as he begins to explore the world and engages with mom and dad and siblings and all that in the world, is going to cause these white matter structures to grow. And our job as parents and teachers is to help that child grow those structures. So what I'm going to do next is, because we have only 4 minutes left in this class, is I'm going to talk about, let me stop sharing and go back into this one here. We're going to, oops, wait a while, I need to go to here. Sorry about that, I'm just trying to get my screen. Here we go. Where is it? Where is my, okay, put this away. Oh, here. Okay, there it is. Sometimes get complicated. Okay, so we're going to start, we're going to finish up today with a very quick look at serotonin transporter gene. Remember again that we look at Charlie and we say, oh, this is a happy little baby. And then we look at other children and say, oh, this is a very sad and not able to be happy child. This child has a lot of stuff going on that's not necessarily what we would expect or want. And this can happen in our own family. We have 3 children and one of them might be really happy and the other child might be a little bit less happy and what we would call whining a little bit or more demanding or attention seeking. And it can be disruptive in the family, but also in the schools. And that could be a trajectory in life that can cause a lot of problems. So we're going to look at transporter gene for serotonin. And we all get one from mom and one from dad. And so some children get a short from mom and a short from dad. Some children get a short from one of them and a long from one of them. And some children get a long from both. In other words, right from the get-go, our children have genetics that are complicated. And in terms of Charlie, we know that Charlie has a long. That child is happy, he's resilient, he's got all kinds of good things going on. But at the same time, there are children who get a short expression. They don't have enough serotonin in their system, and therefore they don't have the same capacity for being resilient, and we'd call them sensitive children. And then there are some who are in-betweeners, and I'm an in-betweener. I wish I'd known that when I was 10 as opposed to when I was 50, but that's the way the world works, and I found this out much later in life. The problem with a long short is we tend to go to the short side of the world. Somebody press my buttons, I'm going to go pretty negative and pretty anxious and fearful. And today, because I know this, I take a deep breath and I self-regulate and I say, you know what, I'm going to go across to the resilient side. In other words, I have a choice because now I can see, it's like the visual of the shadows and the zebras. You can choose which one you want. Do I want shadows or zebras? Well, in this case, if a child or if a parent or anybody knows that you were born with a short, then you're going to be pretty sensitive, but you can put yourself in a resilient space. That's called self-regulation. If you haven't got that mental model or this image before, then it would be impossible to do it. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to finish up today. And in the last minute, I want you to go to the chat box again and write in one word, just one word of what you feel about what happened in this class in the last hour. It doesn't matter. There is no right or wrong, just one word to summarize the class. And what's going to happen then is tomorrow when we come on here at 6 o'clock tomorrow, your time, we will begin with those words. And I want to show you what happens in the brain when we do that, because tonight you're going to get sleep, probably seven cycles through non-REM into REM. And what does that do for your brain, and how does it impact your capacity for learning? So give me the words, I'll bring them tomorrow, and we'll start our class tomorrow with that long-term potentiation, it's called. And we'll wait a second or two here, and then I'm going to open up the floor. If anybody has any last questions or anything to talk about, then we will do that. So I can see we've got, okay, good. If there's any more, add them right now. So any last questions before I close the room?
Maybe how can we know our serotonin gene combination?
Can you say that one more time? I missed the
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. How do you know in the genetic factors?
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, there's a number of ways to know. Good. First of all, you can get a 23andMe a spit test and do 23andMe and send it off, and they'll send you back. But you need to ask them, what's my serotonin transporter gene? And they'll tell you short, long, or short, long. But beyond that, if you as a child were sent to the principal's office a lot, if you had a lot of allergies, if you were at the doctor's office, if you were an expensive child to raise, if you were a little bit whiny, if you were a bit needy, all that stuff, parents and teachers know these kids immediately. There's 5 or 6 in every single class of children who are just impossible to teach. They're so demanding, so difficult. And those are the children who are typically take up 80% of your time, 80% of your energy, 80% of your skills as a teacher, as a parent, and still you're wondering, what the hell is wrong with that child? How come you can't get your room as tidy as your sister? How come you can't be on time? How come you can't tie your shoelaces? How come I'm always having to call you? How come you're the one I have to remind all the time? That's the child that we're talking about. So if that's you, you know it. You don't have to spend the money on the 23andMe. We as parents and teachers know these kids immediately. Any other questions?
Thank you, Kieran.
You're welcome. And we'll be back here tomorrow. And what I'll ask you to do is, if you think this is important and you know other people who might benefit from it, bring them along. Just say, give them the same link. It's going to be the same link. And the format is very simple. We'll just have a little bit of interaction, but a lot of information and time for questions at the end.
Thank you. That was lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Osman. Good.
Good night.
Good night. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, Emin. Good night, Hamida. Good night, Susan.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Iman. Are you in Cork, Iman?
Yes.
Are you teaching?
No.
Oh, you a parent? You got children? You got children?
No.
Okay, you just want to learn more about brain.
Yes.
Oh, good. And also, Famida, are you there? Maybe not. Okay, we'll connect up again tomorrow. Good night, everybody.